So first of all, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming along. My name's Sarah Lewis. I'm a chartered organisational psychologist and I'm going to be taking the session over the next hour and a half. A couple of things just to clarify before we get going. It's only now in this context when someone asked me a question that I have realised that the title of this module could be ambiguous. It's crystal clear to me, because I've put the thing together, that it's directed to people who are going to be giving an appraisal, being the manager in the situation. So this is for the appraisor. We had an earlier session that was more oriented towards being an appraisee. So the first thing is everybody here expecting to have to give appraisal, to do appraisal? Great, okay. It's a good start then. The second thing is, what we're going to do today is, this session is about increasing the chances of that session being life-enhancing and motivating for you and the appraisee. That's the general idea. So we're going to look at positive approaches, ways of getting into a good appraisal conversation that should hopefully have those effects. And we will, at the end of the hour and a half, we will also look at, and how do we get from there into perhaps some of the more difficult areas that we might want to discuss. But we're not going to major on that whole thing of, I've got something really awful I've got to say to this person and I'm really worried about it. We'll be looking at that next week in a longer session. I'm doing a session on appreciative inquiry and courageous conversations. So if you've got a real kind of something that's really, really worrying you, that is going to be really difficult to say, please come to that session as well. But this is not going to major on that, just so we're clear about that, if that's the expectation that you've come with. If that is part of your concern, you will still find today valuable, I would say. So we're here to look at the life-enhancing, motivating, positive, strength-based approaches into an appraisal conversation. Is that okay with everybody? You're all clear, have got similar sort of expectations. Excellent. Now, most of the session, this is about you. This is a chance for you to think about and prepare and to some extent rehearse some of what you might use in that conversation. So you need to have somebody in mind. So one of your appraisees that you want to be thinking about as we do some of the exercises. It'll be a very experiential morning. I will talk a little bit, but mostly I'll be asking you to work with each other with some guidance. And you've got some sheets of paper, hopefully on your seats, and we'll come to them in due course. So it's, it really is, work is happening in the moment is the general idea. We'll be spending a little time thinking about what you can do beforehand. Then we'll be thinking about some ways you might want to conduct the conversation or part of the conversation in the appraisal process. And at the end of it, you'll get a chance to kind of sum up with your colleague you've been working with what we've learnt in our appraisal conversation. Okay? Good. Excellent. So, you might need a pen and paper. That was the other thing I wanted to say. Oh yes, thank you very much, my beautiful assistant. Can we please fill in the register as well? Thank you very much, Ollie. We want to start on the basis that everybody has something to offer. And so one of the things you can do before you go into your appraisal conversation is spend a little time thinking about the person you're appraising at their best. What can you be enthusiastic about this person? Bring to mind and give yourself some data from what you really appreciate about them, the value that you see them bring. When you feel, a moment where you felt this person is really good in this area. They've really added something. They've helped me. I could see the passion when they were working on that. Something you can get enthusiastic about, and we call this kind of finding your enthusiasm story to help you get in a good mindset for meeting your appraisee and having a motivating and life-enhancing and strengths-based kind of conversation with them. So we're going to go straight into it. I'm going to ask you to find, I've got to find the handouts, where are we? The handout that says enthusiasm story, preparation for appraisal by appraiser. Looks a bit like this. Do you all have one of these? And as you can see, it says, in this process, the appraiser, you can see all that. So we're going to do, first of all, you're going to think about step one for yourself. So recalling a specific event in which you were enthusiastic about your employee. So that's just what I was saying. When you saw them doing really well, when you thought, yes, they're really good at something, when you felt a little pride in them, something they'd done or something you'd seen them do. So you're going to spend a little time thinking about that for yourself. And then I want you to find a colleague and just rehearse the telling of the story. Because This is what you're going to do. You could do in your appraisal interview is say that I want to tell you something about when I see you at your best. I'm going to tell you about an event in which I was especially enthusiastic about your work. I'd like you to listen to the event and allow yourself to enjoy it without playing down your contribution. It's actually quite important that the person can hear you're genuine. Out of all the things they do, the things you genuinely appreciate and are enthusiastic about. And that, otherwise, people get into that, oh yes, well, but sort of state. We don't really need that. For your colleague, what you're going to ask them to give you feedback on was how genuine that sounded, how it came across. Just sitting there, it's not their story, obviously, but just being the person who was hearing and listening to that story, how it resonated. Did it sound genuine? Could they see what you're enthusiastic about? How might it have made them feel? So it's just a little bit of reflection back for you on how that landed, shall we say, with someone standing in for the moment. And so you can see, so you're going to practice the words that are used here, tell the story, and then what you would do in the whole thing is the follow-up questions that are on the sheet. But here, because we're just in a practice place, we're going to stop after you've told the story and take the feedback from the colleague. Is that okay? Each take a turn. I'd say probably about 15 to 20 minutes. It's sort of 10 minutes each to think about, tell your story, get some feedback, and then switch over. Okay? Good to go? Yep. Find someone near you that you're happy to work with. Think about confidentiality issues, obviously. Okay, thank you all very much, folks. I know it is quite noisy in here, and just to remind myself before we go into the next round of conversations, you are very free to move the chairs into sort of slightly separate spaces. And of course, you can always, if you want to have a stand-up conversation in the ante-room here, I wouldn't go any further or we'll never see you again, but we can use the spaces that we've got, so thank you for that. So hopefully we're beginning to get the idea that this is about working out what we're looking to do in the conversation is understand more about the person at their best and what helps that to happen. When they're performing at their best, what's going on, what makes it possible, so that we can create more of that for them, so that they have a better chance of being at their best more of the time. It's really important for them to understand what we see good as. What do we as the appraiser, as the manager, value, recognise as performance, see as important, see as successful. So we're giving them that information in hopefully a very motivating way. So we only went as far as just rehearsing the story, because we don't always tell these stories, so we need to have a little rehearsal, and you'll find your appraisee may well sort of squirm a bit, because we don't usually hear these stories either, so there's a little sort of, but that's fine. And then I think, on your sheet it's got step 4, which is where you can go with that conversation, with the general objective of finding out, how if they also found it as motivating and rated it as highly as you did observing it, then that's great, because what you're wanting from them and what they feel they're best at are aligned. Of course, it could be a situation where you share something that you think is, what you're really enthusiastic about, and they say, well, yes, but that, I struggle with that part of the job, or I much prefer it when I'm doing this. And you're just into an interesting conversation then about kind of alignment or misalignment. But some of the questions here about, what can you tell me about what was going on for you that enabled you to perform so well? What was it about what happened before, what happened after, about that particular incident or that particular episode that you were able to be at your best? What seemed to bring out the best in you? What was motivating or enthusing? So you're starting to get in that conversation about what enables me to be at my best. What we want to do is to build on that by now getting a little bit about their perspective of when they're at their best. So we're going to go into another kind of conversation with them, which is much more about them. Now, for us to practice this, as it were, each of you will get a chance to tell your own story of yourself at your best, as if you were being, in this conversation, as the appraisee. So you need to pick a story for yourself that you're happy to share with the person you're working with about when you feel you're at your best at work, so that they can practice working with that as the appraiser. Does that make sense? And then again, we'll swap over. So you should have another sheet in your collection called the feed forward interview, which is what we're going to look at in a moment. So just to sort of, what this process does is, again, to allow us to understand something more about our appraisees' motivated states, you know, what gives them vigour in their work, where they flourish at work, what insights into what supports their well-being and so on, and to understand the conditions in which they are likely to flourish. You can take this conversation in other directions. We won't have time to do all of it today, but certainly you can go on with a further set of questions about achievements, for example. So there's sort of different things you can keep exploring in terms of what's this person's value system, how do they understand their role, when are they at their best, what's motivating for them, how does that align with what I'm thinking. Great for the bits that align. The bits that don't align, we need to have a conversation about to sort of see what, you know, how we can get a better match. Explanation, understanding, and so on. So what I want to ask you to do is, again, to team up with a colleague. Looking at the sheet, we're only going to go up to step 3 at this point, and we'll look at the other 2 after we've had a chance to come back together. So it gives you some words here. You don't have to use these exact words, obviously, but it's often quite useful to have a sort of template to work from. So you're going to introduce what's going to happen so that they've got a sense of where we're going. Then could you please tell me a story about something that's happened at work during which you felt really good? So we're not actually at this point looking at the results, because sometimes, you know, we're really excited about something and we're at our best, but the results aren't what we hoped for. At the moment, we're really focused on when people feel they're at their best, when they're really energized, what gives them well-being at work, when they're moving their strengths, so we get more understanding of the conditions necessary for that. And then just explore the story a little bit with them. So these things like, what was the peak moment, what were you thinking, what was going on, how did you feel, what else was happening. So we're just exploring what can we learn about this person in terms of their values, their motivations, what gives them energy, where they get their satisfactions, what makes them feel good when they're at work in the first instance. Okay? You might like to take the opportunity to work with a different colleague. You're very welcome to do that. Some of us might think one new person in the morning is enough. I'll stick with the person I found, thank you very much. But if you'd like to be bold and meet another colleague, that's fine as well. And as I say, please do make the most use of the space. And the other thing is, if we all start off our conversations as sotto voce as we can manage, then the whole volume of the room stays a little bit lower. So just to have a go at that. So again, it's going to be sort of a few minutes each way, so probably about 7 minutes each way. If we make it 15 minutes, so the people who are in threes have a chance to each have a go. Is that okay? You need to think of something for yourself, take a turn as the appraiser and the turn as the appraisee. Lovely. Thank you. Did we, once we got over the embarrassment, find it quite enjoyable and motivating telling our own story? Yes. Yeah, good. One yes. You haven't heard his story yet, oh dear. You could continue the conversation afterwards. And did we learn something about the person whose story we told? Yeah, okay. So, in our conversation now, we should have some sense of your perception of the appraisee at their best, some sense of the appraisee's perception of themselves at their best, and some exploration of what we've learned about them from these two conversations. So what have we learned about their values, their motivation, their strengths, etc., etc. So we've got all of that kind of in the room already. What we want to move on to now is understanding a little bit more about the conditions that make it possible for them to be at their best, using the story you've brought and the story they've brought. What was it that was going on that made it possible for them to be at their best in those particular situations at those particular times. And obviously building on from that, how can we, going forward, given the demands of their task, their role, their job, make it more possible for them to be in those situations, to create those conditions to be at their best more of the time. So this is step 4 and step 5 of the sheet that you've got in front of you. So again, I mean, this is a 5-finger exercise. We're just running through it once to see how it fits and feels and whether we think it might work for us. But I'd encourage you, with the person you've just worked with, because we need to work with the same story, just move on to questions 4 and 5 and ask them about, what was going on for them, what were some of the things that were happening, why was it possible on that occasion that they could do whatever it was they've been telling you about. And then, if you can, get into that conversation about how that might move, how that might help us in the future. And then maybe if you get a couple of minutes, because we've got 2s and 3s going on here, so some people are finishing at different times, obviously. If you get a little time at the end just to review with your colleague who you've been appraising in this context, how the conversations help them. Would just be kind of interesting feedback for you if you get the time for that. Does that make sense? Yeah, again, I do encourage you, please feel free to move your chairs into sort of slightly more contained spaces, but if you're managing, that's absolutely great. So, so on to steps 4 and 5, or in some cases, let's share the other story. That's absolutely fine. Okay, thank you again. Clearly, I'm sure we're all aware, these are not ideal conditions for conducting a conversation of this nature. This is a practice run. So I'm hoping that, obviously, when you're working with your particular people, you'll be in a quiet place with some time. That's the general idea. So you can follow this exercise kind of in more depth. So there was a very useful question, a couple of useful questions asked, actually, that made me think of a couple of things I wanted to say. One is, we haven't talked about the bigger context or the whole framing of an appraisal conversation, but I think the nearer we can get to a joint endeavour. This is a joint exploration of what makes it possible for you to be at your best and what that means, a joint problem solving and a joint planning for the future. Not always possible, I know, but that's the kind of frame we want to be in. And so when we were looking at step 4 in the exercise you've just done, when we're starting to work out what it might be that makes it possible for someone to perform at their best, of course you can bring your own observations in. So listening to your story, it seems to me one of the things that might have had an impact is, what do you think? Or, something of that sort of nature, absolutely right. Or I was really interested that you said this, and I don't think we always do that, do we? Did that make a difference? Those sorts of things, absolutely, bring your own observations in. It's a joint exploration of what enables this person to produce peak performance, which of course is what we're all after, the person and you. Second question that was asked was, well, that's all very well, but that may have been a real one-off. So how can we keep recreating that in the future? That may not be possible. Absolutely. So what we're looking for, and we haven't really had time to do that today, but hopefully you will when you're working in your actual appraisals, is kind of, can we get to what are some of the underlying features? So we've got the surface story of this particular event, but what were some of the features that played into that? And the example we were coming up with is it may have been that one of the reasons that piece of work went very well for this particular person was they had had a chance to talk to all the people involved beforehand. So they'd established relationships or they'd got information or something. Now that as a principle, we might be able to take to other settings. So there's a project coming up. So one of the things we've learned is for you, it might be really useful before you start doing something else is to talk to all the people who might be connected with or impacted by this project. Or you might want to go around and make personal invitations. Now for someone else, it might be much more about the fact, one of the reasons I felt that piece of work went really well was just for once I had the time to sit down and think for 3 hours before I went into the meeting or whatever it is.
I don't agree with that. What if you don't agree with them having to think for 3 hours?
Well, that depends on whether we want them to perform at their best. Life is a compromise. Yeah. But it's kind of, if we know that makes a real difference to their ability to perform, that people are all different. Some people need a lot of reflection before action. Other people are much more, let's take some action, find out what happens, and then reflect and learn. That's the way we're made. We need to help people moderate their behaviour so it's not unhelpful and so on. But that would be, this is compromise. We can't necessarily give everybody exactly what they want, but it's helpful to know what's really useful to them. And what we're going to move on to now is some of that in the final bit of kind of fast-forwarding our conversation. As I say, we've found out something about our perceptions of good, their perceptions about their best, something about them, something about how we might learn from those experiences, about what they need to be at their best. And now we move into kind of how do we put it all together, and the transition to some of those areas where hopefully we both agree that they're not at their best. So if we spent time really exploring the good, the transition to the not so good, from the strengths to the weaknesses, from the performance to the lack of performance, whatever you want to describe it, should be easier. Because usually when we feel acknowledged for what we do bring and what we are good at and the strengths that we do have, we are more able to acknowledge the areas that we aren't so good at. We don't feel so defensive, basically. So, for the final few minutes, again, it's a kind of practice of how you might move on to doing some summaries. So collectively, what have we learnt about the strengths of the person who's being appraised? What have we learnt about what motivates them? What have we learnt about the conditions that necessary may not be the word you want to use, that are desirable perhaps for you to be at your best? What have we identified as the future goals? Well, we usually have these sorts of things. And then we come to what about the important parts of your job that do not draw on the things that motivate you or energize you or your strengths? How can we, joint again, make them engaging for you? And if not, what strategies can we use to enable you to perform better in this part of your job? So that's one of the ways you can kind of transition from the bits that are going well, we've really appreciated, enjoyed, celebrated, learnt from. So we're learning from success. And now we're just thinking, how can we work with some of the areas that aren't going so well? And some of the strategies are put here for you. Is it possible to delegate things? Can we trade parts of our role with colleagues who are actually very good at that, or they find it really energizing? Is there any scope? I'm not suggesting you go through all of these. It's just ideas here for you. Can we break the task down into bite-sized chunks to make it more amenable for you? So you just do a little bit every day, rather than having this huge thing you really don't want to do that by the deadline you're an absolute tizzy about and it gets done badly again, And this is the thing about, I was saying this morning about eating the frog every morning. This is if we have to do something we really don't like doing, like eating a frog, for example, there's different ways we can do it, but some people, their approach is, I'm going to have to do this every day. I'm going to get up, I'm going to do that, then it's done, and the rest of the day is just fantastic in comparison. I've done the difficult thing and I'm going to have a really great day. For other people, it's much more about, why would I want to spoil the day by doing something awful first thing? I'm going to have a great day, and then at the end, just before I go to bed, ready for the next day, I'll do that difficult thing. What doesn't tend to work for people is saving them all up for the end of the month. Okay, that really doesn't look like a great thing to do. So how do we get the things that are difficult and just break them into smaller chunks? That's just, one of the many tactics. But it's the more we can get to that, we've got, if I may just use you, we've got this joint thing. It's got to get done. It's part of your job. It clearly doesn't pay to your strengths. Lots of other things do. What strategies can we come up with to help you get that done? Yeah? As I said, these are not the most difficult conversations. We'll have a bit more of a look at them next week if you want to come along. These are just kind of, hopefully, as I say, our aspiration at this is at the end, the person goes away motivated to do their best. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so would you like to spend another, it's going to be about 5 minutes each way really, just having an attempt in this sort of 5-finger exercise to summarise what you've learnt about your colleague from their story, and just practice making that transition and see how it feels to be on the other side when someone's endorsed the good and then says, can we look at some of the areas that perhaps aren't so motivating for you, don't seem to be going so well, what can we do about them? And see how that feels. Just try and get on for size. Yep. Okay, again, feel free to move around. Okay, hi. Of course, as ever, time is against us. I just wanted to revisit, actually, the question that was asked earlier about if somebody asks you for something that isn't possible. Okay, that happens. I think it is a case of something about, I'm really sorry, but that won't be possible. But what would be possible is, or let's explore what might be possible. So just steer away from the kind of impossible bit as quickly as possible into the what we can do, what is possible, what might be negotiable that would help move things forward would be just the kind of advice on that.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Of course.
What if someone asks about pay in their appraisal?
Pay in their appraisal. I refer you to your organisational colleagues. That's not one, I'm afraid, for me to answer, but a good question, I'm sure, and maybe a way of sharing that. I don't think Ollie's actually in the room at the moment. Lucky Ollie. So he's escaped that one. Okay, thanks anyway. I'm sure you'll be asked to do an evaluation of the session, but I would like to do just a quick one for myself, if that is okay, before you leave. I'm going to ask you if you would. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you to shut your eyes and raise your hand, just so that you all make an individual decision rather than what's going on around you. So the question just is, the question I'm going to ask you is, have you got something from this session that you think will be useful for you in your appraisal conversation? That's going to be the question. Oh, so shut your eyes and raise your hand if the answer is yes. Okay, excellent. Now look around if you'd like to. Oh, keep your hand up so people can see. So generally speaking, there was more than that. They've all put their hands down now. That's lovely. Okay, well, thank you all very much, and have enjoyable, motivating, life-enhancing conversations.